Do you want to be ahead of the game for the latest in arts, music, cuisine, and entertainment across the Middle East's most dynamic capital cities? Al Monitor is proud to launch our City Pulse newsletters, focused exclusively on local news, starting in Riyadh, Dubai, Istanbul, and Doha. Each week, our on-the-ground writers in these cities cover the latest cultural happenings and trends, so you have everything you need to know for the best local experiences. To subscribe for free, go to almonitor.com, that's al-monitor.com, and sign up on our newsletter page.
Welcome back to the Al Monitor Brief. I'm Adam Lucente. The death toll from Sunday's attack on a Hanukkah gathering in Sydney, Australia's Bondi Beach stood at 16 a day later, with new victims being named, including a 10-year-old girl, a Holocaust survivor, and a former policeman. The man who confronted one of the assailants and grabbed his rifle has been revealed as a Syrian immigrant named Ahmed al-Ahmed. Originally from the northwest Idlib province, Ahmed had surgery on Monday and is now in recovery. Now, this attack is part of a rising trend of antisemitism in Australia since October 7, 2023. Just 2 days after the Hamas attack and the Gaza war began, there were chants of "Gas the Jews" outside the Sydney Opera House. Since then, there's been instances of vandalism targeting a number of Jewish institutions in Australia, making the country a battleground in this rising trend. Now, some Jewish groups were sounding alarm bells in the lead up to the attack. The Australia, Israel, and Jewish Affairs Council said on Monday that they had been warning that rhetoric in the country around the Israeli-Palestinian conflict would lead to violence against Jewish Australians. This attack is also occurring amid talk of an ISIS resurgence around the world. On Saturday, the Islamic State killed 2 U.S. soldiers in Syria. Now, the alleged perpetrators of the Sydney attack have been revealed as father and son, Sajid and Naveed Akram. The father was killed in the ordeal, while Naveed is in the hospital under police guard. Australian police said one of the attackers, which is reportedly the son, was known to them over connections to an ISIS cell in Sydney. Now, this has raised a lot of questions in Australia, which notably has very strict gun laws. Sajid was a legal gun owner in the country, and how he could get the weapons given this investigation is unclear. Sajid is from Pakistan, according to local reports, but that has not been confirmed by officials. Meanwhile, Australia-Israel ties remain at a low, and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu criticized Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese over the attack, saying his policies, chiefly the recognition of a Palestinian state, is connected to the bloodshed. In this episode, we'll hear from Al Monitor's newsletter and content editor, Gabrielle Debinski. Gabrielle, who is from Australia, will go over the debate within the country over how to fight rising antisemitism, as well as the state of Australia-Israel ties, and what this attack means for Netanyahu's international standing. We'll also go over the possibility of more ISIS and jihadist activity occurring in Australia. Hope you enjoy. Gabrielle, welcome back to the Al Monitor Brief.
Thank you.
Gabrielle, first, I wanted you to maybe take us through Australia's experience with terrorism. Obviously, people know it's a country with much stricter gun control than the US. It seems to me that Australia has had less of attacks of this magnitude than Europe or the US. How does this attack compare to others in Australia's recent history?
Right. Well, while Australia has been grappling with terrorism, partly due to its territorial isolation, it has been shielded by some of the large-scale violence that has plagued Europe and elsewhere, as you mentioned. But the Sydney Hanukkah assault that we saw over the weekend is the largest terror attack on Australian soil. Interestingly, the most significant attack on Australia actually didn't occur on Australian soil, but as you might recall, was in Bali, Indonesia in 2002, when 2 nightclubs were bombed by a Southeast Asian offshoot of Al-Qaeda. And out of just over 200 deaths, 88 were Australian. And Bali is a very popular Australian tourist destination. That was a really significant event that rattled the Australian psyche. And then back in 2014, a lone gunman took a couple dozen Australians hostage in a cafe in central Sydney, resulting in 2 deaths, as well as the gunman who was an Iranian national who had pledged allegiance to ISIS.
That's actually a good transition to a point I wanted to get to, which is the ISIS angle. There are reports one of the suspects in the shooting was investigated over ties to the Islamic State. Where does countering jihadist groups like ISIS fit into Australia's overall security strategy? And what I mean is, how much of a priority are groups like that in comparison to other threats?
I would say it features heavily in Australia's overall security strategy, though, of course, given its proximity to China, managing those tensions dominates Australia's overall security calculus. Still, earlier this year, the Australian Parliament passed the State Sponsors of Terrorism Act, that essentially expands the scope for Canberra to deal with terrorism-related offences when they're linked to foreign governments. And the government's first act under this new code was to designate Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps as a state sponsor of terrorism. This occurred after Australia's leading security agency found that it had directed 2 anti-Semitic attacks on Australian soil last year, an arson attack at a kosher restaurant in Sydney and another arson incident at a synagogue in Melbourne. Canberra subsequently expelled the Iranian ambassador and Tehran reciprocated. So I'd say countering terrorism is a real priority of the current Albanese government.
And many in Australia's Jewish community have been sounding the alarm about anti-Semitism since the October 7th attack in 2023 and the subsequent Gaza war. As we reported some of those incidents and the Iran story, like you mentioned, we know the government has taken some action already, but do you think the government could change its approach to fighting anti-Semitism after an attack of this magnitude? And what could Canberra do differently, if anything?
Right. Well, the current centre-left Labor government is beholden to a progressive electorate that has taken a very firm stance against Israel's military campaign in Gaza over the past few years. But regular pro-Palestinian protests across major cities have also often included anti-Semitic rhetoric and incitement against the Jewish community. So as a result of this, Albanese appointed an anti-Semitism envoy who handed down a report in July with a series of recommendations, including strengthening hate crimes, offering tougher screening of visa applicants for anti-Semitic views or alleged anti-Semitic views, and a focus on universities and broadcasters. Canberra has so far balked at many of these recommendations, citing freedom of speech concerns. And the Australian Jewish community has pushed back, saying, well, at least we want stronger enforcement of existing hate laws. So this is a conversation that no doubt will intensify in the coming days and weeks.
I want to conclude by talking about the wider picture of Australia-Israel relations. Some Israeli officials criticized Prime Minister Albanese's statement following the attack. There was also, of course, Prime Minister Netanyahu's statement linking the situation in Australia to the Australian recognition of Palestinian statehood, which Albanese pushed back on. Do you see this incident harming Israel-Australia ties further? And what would be the wider ramifications of a further deterioration?
Well, as you mentioned, Australia-Israel ties really reached a low point during the recent war, particularly when the Albanese government joined European states and Canada in recognising a Palestinian state in September. And with Australia having seen a steady uptick in anti-Semitism since October 2023, this event has only really exacerbated those divisions. In fact, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu took fierce and direct aim at the Australian Prime Minister, accusing him directly of being responsible for the bloodshed by failing to crack down on anti-Semitism. So I really think this event is only going to exacerbate those tensions in the months ahead. In terms of the ramifications of the events we've seen in Sydney over the last 24, 48 hours, I think for the Netanyahu government, it validates a lot of what it has been saying about the rise of anti-Semitism around the world since the October 7 attacks and the ensuing war in Gaza. This is part of a trend of deterioration in relations between Israel and its partners in North America, Europe, and Asia. Having said that, as we know, the Australia-Israel relationship is not as consequential as the one that Israel enjoys with the United States. So I think the fallout will be diplomatically limited.
Gabrielle, thanks a lot for your time, and look forward to more of your editing and reporting on this issue.
Thanks for having me, Adam.
Thanks for listening to the Al Monitor Brief. Be sure to follow Al Monitor for more on the stories impacting the Middle East. Until next time, I'm Adam Lucente.